Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to reverse engineer the physical world around us. From how massive ships float to how meteorites survive falling through our atmosphere, we're meticulously unpacking the definitive blueprint of fluid mechanics. You know, whether you've ever found yourself wondering how a gigantic aircraft actually stays suspended in the sky, or why water seemingly defies gravity to curve up the side of a glass, the answers all lie right here in the hidden architecture of flow.
All right, let's map out our journey. We're going to hit 6 key areas today. 1. Defining the fluid state. 2. Phase 1. Fluids at rest. 3. Phase 2. Fluids in motion. 4. Phase 3. Viscosity and friction. 5. Phase 4. Surface tension phenomena. And finally, number 6. The Unified Flow Master Matrix.
So Section 1. Defining the fluid state. Before we really get going, we need to establish exactly what makes a liquid, well, a liquid. Comparing our states of matter, the crucial baseline assumption for our models is that liquids are strictly incompressible. Think about it. Solids resist deformation entirely. They've got a fixed shape and volume. Gases, totally variable shapes and volumes, and they compress super easily. But liquids sit perfectly in the middle. They maintain a fixed volume but have a variable shape because they continuously deform under shear stress. Basically, they flow when pushed sideways. And because they cannot be compressed, it allows us to predict their behavior mathematically with honestly incredible precision.
Section 2. Phase 1. Fluids at rest.
Let's look at fluids when they're perfectly still. Check out these 3 containers, one straight, one flared, and one zigzagging all over the place. Now logically, you might think the weird shape or the total volume of the fluid would completely change the pressure at the bottom, right? Well, the hydrostatic paradox proves otherwise. Pressure relies exclusively on vertical depth and fluid density. This means a massive, jagged container and a tiny straight tube exert the exact same gauge pressure at their bases. It's driven purely by density, gravity, and depth. Add in the atmospheric pressure pushing down from above, and boom, you get your absolute pressure.
So how do we actually measure all that atmospheric weight pressing down on us? Enter Evangelista Torricelli and his invention, the barometer. His choice of fluid was brilliant. He used mercury. Because of its extreme density, we're talking 13,600 kilograms per cubic meter here, it creates a neat, compact 76-centimeter vacuum column. If he had used water, which is way less dense, he would have stubbornly needed a massive 10-meter pipe just to do the exact same job. You'll also notice the U-tube manometer doing something very similar for enclosed gases, where the gas pressure equals the atmospheric pressure plus the hydrostatic pressure of the fluid column.
Okay, now let's see how enclosed fluids transmit all this pressure. The absolute crucial point of Pascal's law is what I like to call the hydraulic trade-off. Pressure in an enclosed fluid is transmitted equally in every single direction. Since pressure is just force divided by area, if we increase the area, the force has to increase proportionally to keep that pressure constant. It's an amazing loophole. It allows us to trade input distance for massive output force. By pushing down on a narrow piston with a mere 1,500 Newton push, that pressure seamlessly distributes to effortlessly lift a massive 13,000 Newton car on the wider piston. It's like magic, but it's just physics.
To wrap up our stationary phase, we literally can't ignore Archimedes. He dictates the ultimate rule of flotation. Anytime an object is immersed in a fluid, it experiences an upward buoyant force equal to the weight of the fluid it displaces. It is a literal, continuous battle against gravity. An object only floats if its density is less than the liquid, displacing enough fluid to create an upward force that fights off and beats its own downward weight. If the densities perfectly match, it just hovers in equilibrium. And of course, if the object is denser, it sinks.
Section 3. Phase 2. Fluids in motion.
Let's inject some energy into this. We start with the principle of mass conservation. In an enclosed pipe, your flow can be smooth and laminar or chaotic and turbulent. But regardless, fluid cannot just vanish into thin air. To maintain a constant flow rate without mysteriously losing mass along the way, any decrease in a pipe's cross-sectional area demands an immediate proportional surge in velocity. That is the famous A1V1 equals A2V2 rule. If the pipe gets twice as narrow, the fluid literally has to move twice as fast to push the same volume through.
But wait, before we completely drown in the complex math of moving fluids, let's anchor this in the real world. Let's ask a question that seems to truly defy gravity. How exactly does a massive 400-ton airplane safely stay up in the sky?
Well, Bernoulli's theorem provides the golden rule to answer exactly that. It's basically just the conservation of energy applied to fluids. It states that the total energy, which is made up of pressure, kinetic energy, and potential energy, is always constant. So, assuming height remains level, meaning our potential energy variable isn't changing, fluid velocity and internal pressure share a strict inverse relationship. Simply put,
As speed goes up, pressure must go down.
And that is exactly how you get an airplane to fly. By designing a wing so that air travels faster over the top than the bottom, you create low pressure above it and high pressure below, generating upward lift. The same inverse relationship dictates the Magnus effect. That's what causes a rapidly spinning cricket ball to drag air faster on one side, creating low pressure that aggressively curves it downward mid-flight. And similarly, Torricelli's speed of efflux uses these exact principles to show that water shooting from a punctured tank has a velocity determined directly by gravity and the depth from the surface down to the hole.
Section 4, Phase 3, Viscosity and Friction.
Perfect equations are great, but in the real world, things are a bit sticky. Real fluids don't slide perfectly. They suffer from internal friction, which we call viscosity. Think of fluid as a deck of cards sliding forward on a table. The bottom card right against the table has a velocity of 0, and each card above it drags against the one below. This creates a shear stress drag as the different layers try to slide past one another. The coefficient of viscosity is exactly that ratio, the shear stress dragging the fluid divided by the strain rate, which is just how fast those individual layers are deforming as they move.
Now, what happens when you turn up the heat? This is where we hit the temperature paradox, and it's super interesting. In liquids, heating breaks the cohesive bonds holding the molecules together so they flow smoothly and quickly, kind of like warm honey. But in gases, heating injects energy that causes violent, rapid molecular collisions. This chaotic microscopic traffic jam actually increases their internal friction, making the gas far more viscous. Believe it or not, this internal friction is our ultimate protector. Stokes' law calculates this viscous drag on a falling sphere. If you look at the formula, you'll see it relies heavily on the object's radius squared. This means larger objects, like falling meteorites or massive raindrops, face an exponentially higher viscous drag pushing up against their downward weight. Eventually, this upward drag perfectly balances gravity, resulting in an acceleration of 0. We call that terminal velocity, and it's what prevents a completely lethal impact from things falling out of the sky.
Section 5, Phase 4, Surface Tension Phenomena.
For this next phase, let's zoom way into the microscopic boundary layer. Deep inside a fluid, a molecule is pulled equally in every single direction by its neighbors, right? That results in 0 net force. But surface molecules lack upward neighbors, so they suffer this unbalanced downward tension. This makes the surface act like a stretched elastic skin that aggressively strives for the absolute minimum surface area to maintain stability. That is exactly why water droplets naturally form spheres. A sphere literally has the smallest possible surface area for a given volume. This tension triggers a microscopic tug-of-war right at the boundary of a glass. With water, its adhesion to the glass is stronger than its own internal cohesion, so it literally crawls up the side, creating a dipping, acute angle that wets the glass. But with mercury, its internal cohesion is vastly stronger than its adhesion to glass, so it pulls in on itself, creating a bulging, convex meniscus with an obtuse angle that doesn't wet the glass at all. As a fun side note, detergents intentionally lower this contact angle so water can aggressively wet and clean fabrics it normally wouldn't even penetrate. This same surface skin creates excess internal pressure, which explains why a hollow soap bubble actually has double the pressure of a solid water drop. It has 2 surface layers, inside and out. This same tension is what drives water up narrow capillary tubes. And here is where it gets really crazy. If a capillary tube is sliced completely off below the water's natural calculated rise height, it stubbornly refuses to overflow. Instead, the meniscus just flattens its angle of contact to 90 degrees. The cosine of 90 is 0, meaning the upward force zeroes out, instantly halting the ascent at the exact brim of the cut tube. Nature is wild.
Section 6, the Unified Flow Master Matrix.
Okay, we've looked at all the isolated pieces. Let's pull it all together into the complete architecture. This master matrix elegantly harmonizes our 4 disparate phases into one interconnected, unified mathematical landscape. We've got hydrostatics dictating pressure at rest, hydrodynamics balancing the energy of fluids in motion, viscosity introducing the reality of friction and drag, and surface phenomena dictating the microscopic behaviors at the boundaries. Every single concept seamlessly connects to the next.
So, what should you really take away from all this? Ultimately, true mastery isn't just the rote memorization of variables. It's a dynamic comprehension of how these physical laws interact in real time. From the hydraulic brakes stopping your car to the aerodynamic lift of your next flight, this matrix literally governs it all. But if this is how standard fluids behave, what happens when these rules completely break down at quantum levels or in non-Newtonian fluids? Look around you. The hidden rules of flow are playing out everywhere, just waiting to be decoded. Where will you spot them next?